Hi, everyone. This is Raquel.
Hi, and this is Jennifer.
Welcome to Madness Cafe.
This is a feminist podcast where we talk about women's issues, politics, and health and wellness.
And where those issues intersect. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Madness Cafe. Welcome to our first installment of our 2025 banned book series. And the first book is All Boys Aren't Blue by, All Boys Aren't Blue, a Memoir-Manifesto, that's important, by George M. Johnson. I'm so excited to talk about this book. I'm just going to read George's bio from the back of the book. It says, George M. Johnson, they, them, is an Emmy-nominated, award-winning, and best-selling Black non-binary, God, I can't speak today, author and activist. They have written on race, gender, sex, and culture for Essence, The Advocate, BuzzFeed News, Teen Vogue, and more than 40 other national publications. My goodness. They are also a proud HBCU, for those of you who don't know, historically Black college and university, alum twice over, and a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Their debut memoir, All Boys Aren't Blue, was a New York Times bestseller and garnered many accolades. This is really important. It was the second most banned book of 2022 in the United States, according to the American Library Association. Holy crap. And so many other things, like George is amazing.
Amazing.
It has gotten so many accolades, so well deserved. I really, 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 really like this book.
Well, the first thing I want to talk about is, why did they ban this book? What were the reasons?
Okay. Couple of, more than a couple. First off, it's about a Black queer boy. So you've got race, you've got homosexuality, and they also talk about, there is a scene or a couple of scenes where George describes homosexual, or specifically gay male sex.
Mm-hmm.
It's not gratuitous at all, and it's not sensationalized or anything like that. In fact, for somebody who is questioning their sexuality or coming to terms or just coming into their own, it's helpful information, I would think, right? Those, I'm sure, are the reasons why it was banned.
Well, this book reads to me like it was written for adolescent young men coming to terms with their race and sexuality. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things I love about the book, is how it's written as, in some ways, a how-to book, or maybe not how-to is not really the right way to describe it, but like I wish I knew when I mm-hmm. was young book.
Right.
Full of not telling someone what to do, but advice and information mm-hmm. that could be very helpful when mm-hmm. one is questioning their sexuality.
Or just coming to terms with. I mean, because I don't think that George ever necessarily questioned their sexuality. It was more, I think, a question of coming to terms with it and making sense of it.
And the coming out of it, I think, was a large part of the story of how, when, where, shouldn't I?
Right. And even, what is it? Like, how do you name it? Yes. What word do you use to talk about something that you don't understand yet?
And do we ever fully understand?
Exactly.
In Iowa, the state's governor wrote a bill that made it a misdemeanor with a fine of $2,500 and up to a year in jail for any educator who gave this book to a teen reader.
That is fucking nonsense. I
I love your response. This is why I love doing the podcast with you. That is fucking nonsense. And you're correct.
Well, thank you. But honestly, I just literally reading this book, my thought the entire way through this book, literally on every single page, is this book is necessary. And as George says there was an interview that I listened to where they talk about having the Maya Angelou quote literally tattooed on themselves, saying, if you can't, I'm paraphrasing, I'm going to get it completely screwed up, but if you don't see the book that you need, write it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what George did.
Mm-hmm. That's what I mean about the book being for a student in school.
Mm-hmm.
He had another quote where thank you. They
You're
had
welcome.
another quote where they said, if you read books, see TV shows and films where you don't see yourself reflected, you start to question if you even exist in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, the book for you isn't written. You have to write it yourself.
Absolutely.
I mean,
Absolutely.
I don't even know if I could do that. I think it's an amazing feat, actually.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. And I think it takes maybe a lifetime of searching and questioning and living and exploring and knowing to be able to do that.
Yeah.
I think it takes a sense of self to be able to go, okay, I this is the book that I needed, so I am going to write it. And
So
that's amazing.
I have 3 main questions for you.
Oh, okay.
Did you like the book?
Mhm.
How was it to read a story written by someone whom you don't share the same life experience with?
Mhm.
And were there things the same that you did share life experience with?
Mhm.
And one more,
Okay.
was any of it very uncomfortable for you?
Okay.
Break that
So,
shit
yeah.
down.
Yes, I love this book. I love this book. I really do. And in fact, I I am so in awe of George's ability to be so candid and to be so specific about their goal in writing the book, of it being a blueprint for the community coming up behind him, right? There's not a meme, but there's a cartoon of, or even a saying, I think, of when you get to a certain point, reach behind you and grab someone else and bring them up with you.
Yeah.
And I think that's what George is doing with this book. No, I am not a queer Black boy, but I am Black. And so there were some things in here that I could definitely identify with. For instance, going to school in a predominantly white setting.
Mm.
I mean, that's been my entire life. My entire life, literally. I mean, probably kindergarten on up. So I got a lot of that stuff. And even before he would explain it, I'm like, I know what that is. I get that. I totally get that. Yeah, I
Mhm.
understand that. Absolutely. Been there. The Some of the things that I couldn't identify with, or that one thing that I didn't like, and we've talked about this before, I think a little bit. I I don't like using the N-word. I don't like
Mm,
it when I don't agree necessarily with the idea of, "Oh, we're gonna own this word and take it back." That's just not my that's just not how it resonates for me. It
mhm,
resonates for other people that way, and that's fine. That's fine. It's not up to me to tell them what resonates with them. That's
mhm.
not me. But I had a hard time with it. So, but I knew go first off going in, he explained or they explained, this is this is what this is. These are what these words are. I can use these words. You, white people, cannot, or non-black people, cannot use this word.
Right.
And I appreciate that George did that. I really do appreciate that. Um, so I like the way that George approached that.
Let me say a real quick thing about
Sure.
that. In the prologue, they say, if you don't identify as Black, African American, or queer, don't use those slurs in full, which can be harmful to others. You can use common abbreviations like N word or F word instead.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I appreciated that being in there because I could see somebody reacting and going, "Oh, but they used it. Why can't I?" Look, don't make people explain shit to you that you already know again. Come on. Don't be
Again, why
stupid.
why I love doing the podcast with you. Keep it real.
So yeah, so that yeah. And then the experience of going to an HBCU. I didn't go to an HBCU. I went to Vanderbilt, which is as far from an HBCU as any school can get.
Right, right.
But there was Black Greek life on our campus. So, and I have friends who are members of Black Greek organizations. So and my mom, she's an AKA, so I have some connection to that, but that was not my personal experience.
Got it.
But it was interesting though that George is a member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity because I was an Alpha sweetheart. So basically, an Alpha sweetheart is like a little sister of that particular fraternity. So that was my entree. That's my only like actual my connection to Black Greek life. But yeah, I thought I am just so in awe of how clear George is with their message of make choices for you, do things for you, love yourself, find your people, right?
Mhm.
And I just think all of and I'm sure editing was some part of that as well, but if the message isn't there, there's nothing for somebody to edit. I really love this book so much, and was I was literally thinking of who I could give this book to, like who needs to read this book. And then I just thought, you know what? Every single person needs to read this book. Because I at first I was like, well, who are the queer kids that I know? I would want to give them this book, whether they're black or not, whether they're male or not. I think all of them could learn from this book. But then I thought, it's not just queer kids that need to read this or kids. I think literally everyone can learn from this book. So yeah, I think this is a really important book. And I think banning it is, as I said before, nonsense and bullshit. And and I think honestly, I mean, there's nothing in here that is gratuitous.
What about
So
though there are sex scenes
yes.
between boys,
Hmm.
boys and
And
boy and
and
boy, or
men.
men and men, not
Hmm.
boys and men, but boys and boy or men to men.
Right, right.
There's also,
But I don't think it was gratuitous.
I don't either.
Yeah.
There's also what I would consider, and I believe George would as well, sexual assault in the
Mhm,
book.
mhm.
Perhaps some concerned parents, I shouldn't quote that because they are
Yeah,
concerned
yeah,
parents.
yeah,
I'm actually not trying to make light of that. There
right.
are parents concerned that maybe this material is too heavy or too much information or not
Mhm.
the right information or whatever for their children. Were you uncomfortable with the sex scenes in the book?
No, I was not. Partly because, like I said, it's not gratuitous, it's not sensationalized, and it was I think I approached it from a point of curiosity
Mm,
because I've had questions,
right,
you know? I mean,
right.
and the whole idea of how do you and similar to anybody's sexual awakening and exploration, how do you find out what you like,
Yes.
right? And you find out what you like by doing things you're like, not gonna do that one again.
Not
Nope,
for me.
learn that lesson. That's not for me. But the fact that there's you do what and I felt like this with George when they talk about, finally having this sexual awakening, this experience and losing their virginity. It's what they wanted. It was their decision. They didn't do anything they didn't want to do. There was consent.
Agency.
There was agency. Yes, that was something that George talks about a lot. And I don't know, maybe I won't do this tabbing thing again because I'm having a hard time finding what I wanted to look for. But yeah, I mean, agency is a huge through line in this
I
book.
I really thought I was going to be uncomfortable with the sexual scenes,
Mhm,
and yet this is I'm not a young gay man. I'm
mhm,
not a young black man. I'm not a young gay black man.
mhm,
But this is where I actually felt connection or some of the universal things that are true for one can be true for all because I
mhm.
felt myself as a young person in those same type of environments like, oh, what's going to help happen next? I've heard about this in sex ed, but I don't actually know how. I mean, I
Right.
know logically how it works,
Well, sure.
but I don't know how it's going to work. and
Right, right. Like we all know slot A goes into tab B.
and
Or
there
tab or slot
you
tab A goes into slot B, right? Yeah.
and their beautiful writing of that really brought me back to my own moments of the feeling of exhilaration that yes,
Mhm.
this is something that I want to explore, I want to be part of, but also like, oh, a little bit of fear of what's going to happen. And then I really do love the agency that they expressed around, "Hmm, I did that. I chose to do that. I'm not going to do that again."
Right,
And
right.
I wish I had more of that type of self-reflection and agency. I'm
Mhm.
finding that now in my 50s. I
Yeah.
wish that I was finding that at a younger age, and I wish we as a culture talked about that in sex ed.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, George talks about that. I'm gonna see if I can try to find the point in the book. Okay, yeah, so there's quite a bit that I underlined here.
Read it to us.
Okay, so starting on page 265, where they're talking about sex ed in school, they write, we learned the basics about sex. We learned about STIs like chlamydia, gonorrhea, and HIV. But again, surface level information. Nothing about how these infections harm one community more than the other, especially HIV in the Black community. I focused on masturbation instead of sex, primarily because I still could not imagine myself having sex with anyone else. The only encounters I'd had with boys weren't the same as what I had seen in love stories or pornography. And then they go on page 266. Even the corny storylines were better than my lived experience, which consisted of no romantic love at all. So sex with myself was going to have to suffice until I had the ability to trust myself with someone else. Again, going into agency and knowing that you weren't ready, knowing yourself enough to know that you aren't ready, right? And then on page 268, they write about their first consensual sexual, anyway, their first encounter, and they say this was much more than losing my virginity. For once, I was consenting to the sexual satisfaction of my body. This moment also confirmed that sex could look how I wanted it to look, and that it could be passionate and kind, but most importantly, fun and satisfying. That
Fun, fun. It's supposed to be fun.
Right. Yes, George. Yes, absolutely. It could look how I wanted it to look.
Yes.
And I think, and I actually underlined and starred and tabbed that section
See,
because I think that's important for all of us, regardless of how you identify, whether you're with a partner, whether you're with multiple partners, whatever. It can look how you want it to look.
yep. And that's why I think that a lot of this book, even though it is written mostly for a young Black gay audience, this is a young adult reader, it's still so universal.
Absolutely.
And so I think a beautiful part of this book is we can take these things and we can want to ban it because it's LGBTQ and it's gay sex, and we use some not nice words in the book and all of these things. But the truth of the matter is that all young people face these situations. All young people, not all of them, not
But
all
the
of the
vast
situations,
majority.
but the questioning ones, the anticipation of the first date, of the first kiss, of, oh, what am I going to do if this person leans over and tries to kiss me and I don't, this is
Right.
what we go through as young people growing towards our adulthood and feeling our sexuality for the first time. I think it was a beautiful read and I highly identified with it, which I found to be kind of shocking, but also kind of like, oh yeah, we are the same.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There's commonality in our experiences because we're all human,
Right. The
because we're
humanity of it.
people. Right. Right. So I'll turn those three questions around to you. You already answered the first one that you really like the book, but what about the other two questions?
What were they?
They were, what did you identify? What did you not identify with? And did it make you uncomfortable? And I think there was a third one and I don't remember how you said it.
Okay. So we can go with that.
Okay.
I really liked it. I liked it a lot. The parts that, okay, there was a really tough part that I didn't, that I actually struggle with. And I wasn't sure I was going to talk about this, but we're going to talk about it
Okay.
because that's
Okay.
what we do. I
Right.
got to find it.
Okay.
Hold on. I think it's actually really important. And it's in the
Okay.
very first part when we're talking about those words, the N word and the F word.
Right.
Which, by the way, I grew up knowing that you do not say those words
Yeah.
either. My mom
Yeah.
also wouldn't let us say the R word either.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, maybe it was further in the book when I was thinking it was at the
They,
beginning of the book, but maybe it was further in the book when they were talking about the white kids quoting the rap songs.
oh, yes, at the high school graduation, the
Yes.
valedictorian.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would really like to find their exact words.
Okay.
Do you know where that is in here?
I'm looking. I'm looking. Okay, I need to go back a little more.
I didn't mark it well because I wasn't going to
Here it
talk
is.
because I
Here it
wasn't
is
going to talk about it.
on page 227. When George is talking about the valedictorian, they're graduating from high school. And George writes on 227, I'll never forget how stupidly he ended his speech.
Yes.
Quote, congrats to all the graduates. We did this one for Tupac and Biggie.
Yes.
End quote. Here was a white kid referring to two murdered Black hip hop artists at a Catholic school graduation. It was that same microaggression, the same I want to be down type of stuff we often saw from white kids who wanted to participate in our culture. Today, we call them culture vultures.
Yes. Okay. This is the part that made me very uncomfortable, obviously, because I'm white. It was the word microaggression, which we talked about before, which I totally had to learn about. But also the type of stuff we often saw from white kids who wanted to participate in our culture. So I struggle with that a little bit in that, why don't we want to share cultures?
Okay, I think this is where George is going with this. Is that it's not just sharing culture. It's not appreciation of Black culture or even of Black gay culture. George talks about, shade and saying honey child.
I definitely
and
have
stuff
done
like
that
that.
kind of stuff.
Oh, well, we're human. All of us probably have. But what George is referring to is when people who are not of that culture use that, whether it's the music or the writing or the slang or the style of dance or whatever it is, and present it as their own, and not acknowledging where that comes from, and not giving credit where credit is due.
I see.
Yeah, and basically trying to pass it off as their own.
Yeah, so I get his words. Congrats to the graduates. We did this one for Tupac and Biggie.
Really? Come on.
And why? Like, why would that even be part of your speech?
Because they graduated right at the time when Tupac and Biggie were killed.
I get it, but still.
Yeah, exactly. This kid, I'm sure, was thinking they were being so cool and hip and with it.
It is a hard line, I think. Where is that line where appreciation becomes appropriation?
I think the difference is not acknowledging where it comes from. I think it's the whole trying to pass it off as, oh, you found this new thing or you created this new thing. No, you didn't.
Like when Brooke Shields had
no,
not
Brooke Shields. It was Bo Derek.
Oh yeah, Bo Derek when she had the
cornrows.
Also, they don't really look good on her.
No.
I mean, they really didn't. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know why that got to be so famous, because I mean, she looked good because she had a great bod.
Right. Well, because I think, I don't know. It's just, that's cultural appropriation at its finest.
Anyway, I think this is a really good part of the book because it made me stop and really think. I was like, oh, okay, where have I done this? And that's another topic I want to talk about, whether intentionally or what was the other word?
Intention versus impact.
Yes, intentionally or non-intentionally. And where did I cause harm?
Right.
what was my impact, whether it was intentional or not. And
Right.
I think that has been, I can't really speak. I'm not a monolith. I can't really speak for the entire white community. I
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
really,
No race is a monolith.
right. But that is one area where I have kind of struggled in the trying to do better when I have done something and I know I've done something, and I don't want to use the white woman tears, but it's almost like I don't want to hurt you.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
that, and that's that.
Exactly.
My intention was not hurt, but my result was hurt.
Right. Right.
And that has been another area of and I know we're getting off target from the book, but I just think these things to bring up, this is another reason like why straight white boys and girls should be reading this book.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm going to tie this back to the book because I do believe that some parents in banning books are thinking that they are protecting children.
Right.
The intent is to protect. The impact is that you're hurting children. You're hurting kid when you ban a book like this, you prevent kids who need to see themselves from seeing themselves. It's a form of erasure. Like George said, I didn't even know I existed until I saw myself on the pages or until I
Yeah.
saw myself in someone else talking about their cousin Hope,
Yes.
right? That's an example of impact, intent versus impact. And I
Yes.
think that's part of the conversation that people aren't paying attention to, maybe, as far as the
Oh,
whole book banning
I
conversation.
think I think they're, yeah, I think they're, it's not that they're not aware of it. I think they're intentionally not looking at that part.
Right, right. They're just not having that part of the
They're like, I'm
conversation.
not going to have that part of the conversation because I'm here to protect kids.
Yes, yes, exactly, exactly. Whether you want it or not.
Yeah.
Paraphrasing our soon-to-be new president. I'm going to
Oh,
protect you whether you want it or not.
that's gross. Patriarchy.
Very, very, very. Okay, so speaking of hope, one of my one of my favorite chapters in the book is when George is talking about hope and hope's transformation and transition. And honestly, that whole chapter, it was just such a love letter basically to hope, and almost an apology of I didn't know the words to say that I appreciated witnessing you go through and become who you were supposed to be.
Yeah.
And part of me wanted to just like reach out and hug George, like cut yourself some slack. You and your family were still there for hope throughout and accepted hope along the journey. And that's that was the
Honest,
important part of that.
honestly, they were in a pretty blessed family, in the
Yes.
fact that a very accepting, warm, welcoming. There
Hmm.
wasn't, it seems to me from reading
Yeah.
the book that people kind of knew about George and Hope. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
although they didn't talk about it a lot or ask a lot of questions, it was generally accepted and they were both generally loved really pretty well by their family.
Right. Right. Like the way that Nanny says, hold on, I want to find exactly the way that Nanny put it.
Nanny.
I love Nanny. I was just like, I want Nanny. I want a nanny. Oh, she's awesome. Okay, let's see if I can find it. I'm probably not going to find the exact quote, but basically Nanny is all the grandkids. Oh, here it is. on page 138, and this kind of bring hopes into it too. George writes, growing up, I had a transgender cousin named Hope, as well as other lesbians and gays within the family. And then it goes down a little bit more and says, when she, meaning Nanny, says, I love each of you differently, she doesn't mean I love you less. She means I love you whole and as you are.
Beautiful.
And then George goes on to say on page 139, how could one family get so right what the world has gotten so wrong? We should have been the rule, not the exception.
Maybe one day they will be the rule.
I do hope so. I swear I hope so. I think George is very open about the fact that not everybody in his family, for instance, his dad's side of the family didn't necessarily, they weren't these enlightened, love everybody and nothing's a sin. They weren't like that, but his father loved him dearly as he was, or as they were, right?
Mhm.
And his mom, same. And they nurtured, and with Nanny as well, nurtured this family of acceptance and love. And you always have a home to go to. You always have somewhere to come back to. Like the other cousins who would, they would go and live wherever, and then maybe in between apartments or whatever, they'd come back and live with Nanny, or they would live with George and their family. It was just this amazing, you always have home. And
Mm,
so many people don't have that, especially people who are marginalized even within their own community.
mm.
And
What
that just, oh, that just,
what did you think about the information that they presented in the book the about the cross section of being gay and Black,
mhm,
and how that being marginalized in two groups, and
mhm.
how, I don't know what
Right,
the
right.
question I'm trying to ask here is.
No, you know what? I thought that was really an important discussion
Mhm,
because I don't think that's talked about enough. And I think it's a similar discussion, not the same, but I think it's a similar discussion for Black women, because there's the marginalization of being Black, and then there's the marginalization of being female,
yes, I could see that
right?
totally.
And so that made complete sense to me.
Mhm,
When George was talking about how going to the predominantly white Catholic high school and then having to not just fight for yourself as a Black kid, but then have to also protect that part of you and hide, let's be
yeah,
real, that
yeah.
part of yourself that's queer. That's a lot of work to go through in a day.
Yes, I really love that part in the book when they were describing doing the jump rope with the
Yeah,
girls.
yeah, yeah. I love that. I love that.
I remember doing that.
Yeah, and when George talks about how the girls would, like, hold their chest,
Yeah.
when they're jumping,
Boop, boop, boop,
and George is like, "I did it too. I didn't have anything to hold, but I did it too." And I thought,
boop.
"That's
And
so great."
that right there is beautiful expression and beautiful freaking writing, because that is capturing what that moment actually felt like.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah, great book.
And George's writing is so great. I feel like I've met these people now. Do you know what I mean? It's not just, okay, here's so and so, and here's so and so, and here's somebody else. George fleshes all of these people out quite beautifully
Yes.
and quite fully.
Yes, in a young adult a novel where
Right.
you're not given as much liberties to
Hmm.
say as much
Right.
as you
Right.
could in an adult novel, and I still felt
Or
strongly connected.
memoir.
Yes,
Yeah.
memoir. I still
And
felt strongly connected to these, I don't wanna call them characters because 'cause they're people.
right. Exactly. Exactly. So it's funny. Let's see. So George actually talks about writing a memoir in their early 30s, right? And so I thought that was a really cool. In fact, I literally underlined and the whole dang thing where okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and read it. So starting on page 296, George says, I must say that it was challenging to write a young adult memoir, especially because I didn't even know that was a thing. I should also say that writing a memoir and only being 33 years of age seemed a bit narcissistic at first, but knowing that the legacy of the book isn't about me removes nearly all of those feelings. It's for you. There were no books for me to read in order to understand what I was going through as a kid. There were no heroes or icons to look up to and emulate. There were no roadmaps or guidelines for the journey. And again, because I know there wasn't and still isn't much out there, I made it my original goal to get this right. In working on this book, I've brought to life a lot of stories involving a Black family dynamic that isn't often talked about. A family that is queer affirming while still learning about and navigating difficult spaces. I released the deepest and darkest things about my past in the hopes that someone might see a reflection of themselves in the words and know that they are not alone, and they too can grow and thrive, and so that they may not make the many missteps I took along the road. That right there is is justification, as if there needs to be justification for not banning books, for allowing children to read the books that they are ready for.
Mhm.
And maybe even not, they don't even know yet that they're ready for it until they read it. This book just like I said, I want to reach out and hug George. I want to hug adult George for putting all this out here and letting people know all of the inner thoughts. And I want to hug little George because it sounds like little George was just awesome and was probably the greatest little kid. I love this book so much. And, we say that about a lot of the books that we've read. And thankfully, we've been very lucky that we've read some amazing books and met some amazing authors. But this book, this book needs to be in the world. And I, for one, am very grateful that it's in the world. And I want more people to read it. So I have to talk about one part that just oh, it just touched my heart so much. And I actually even wrote at the top, I love this. I don't know if you can see that, but it's the letter that George writes to their little brother,
Mhm.
to Garrett.
So
And
sweet.
it's so sweet. And I underlined so much of this. And so at the very end of the letter on page 127, George writes, you have always operated from a place of love. You saw that I was gay, but that it was only one piece of me. You have always done an amazing job of seeing me as fully human, something I wish others in our community learned to do better. My queer identity is a part of my Blackness, and you never made me separate the two. Oh, God. Oh, I mean, just to have those feelings and that support from your family, specifically from your little brother, is just so, it's just so amazing. And to have this experience and to then say, I want other people to have this too. This isn't gloating. This is what it should be for everyone. And I want everyone to have it. And if you don't have it, you can create it. Here's a roadmap, or here are some examples of what it can look like. We need more of this. And George does this also when talking about masculinity
Mm.
and about what joining Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity meant for him or for them, of being accepted, being themselves, being able to showcase masculinity as it was for them, and then to see lots of other examples of ways that masculinity can exist in the world.
I mean, at the end of the day, isn't that what we all want?
Absolutely.
Right. So
Absolutely.
so according to the world, it's a niche book, it's a niche audience, but actually it's a universal truth.
Yes, Jennifer, you said that beautifully. This is there are so many universal truths in this book. In fact, let me read the part that I was just referring to on page 263. And I actually wrote in the margin, I wish society knew this. This could topple patriarchy. This could help save society. And
Patriarchy. Now we're talking.
now we're talking. And this is what George writes on page 263. And this is talking about when they're what's basically crossing the line, basically what it means as a pledge in a Black fraternity when you become a full member of that fraternity.
Yep. Okay.
So George writes, that night I proved to myself that manhood isn't a monolith, that there was a version of manhood, a version of quote unquote manly that looked like me. It would now be on me to become a reflection of Black queer people. I wanted to become the person that future Black queer folks could look to and know that their masculinity could be defined on their own terms. I went into it all chasing masculinity. I came out realizing that there was nothing for me to chase, that the only thing left for me to do was be this person, but in my full truth. It was time for me to begin letting folk into my sexuality and my sexual space while being a member of Alpha Phi Alpha too. It was time for me to define me.
I think that's a beautiful place to end.
I love it. George M. Johnson, if you ever listen to this, thank you so much for writing this book. All Boys Aren't Blue, a Memoir-Manifesto. Readers, buy the book, read the book, share the book. It's the holidays, gift the book, or even outside of the holidays, gift the book. It's a great book. Read it for yourself, read it for the people that you love.
And even bigger, keep it in the libraries.
Mm-hmm.
Keep it in the libraries. Go to your school board meetings if they're trying to ban the book. Speak up.
Please do.
Speak up about banned books.
Yeah, and speak to the people in your life about banned books. I mean, you and I are not in school anymore, but we're benefiting from these books.
That's right.
Everybody should have access to these books.
Everybody should have access.
Yeah. Thank you, Jennifer.
Bye, Raquel.
Bye. Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend.
Or you could leave us a comment and a 5-star review, or email us at madnesscafepodcast@gmail.com.
Thanks, everybody.